Welcome to Prose and Cons, a podcast by writers for writers, brought to you by Precipice Fiction. Precipice Fiction would like to acknowledge the people of the Eora and Durag nations as the original custodians and storytellers of the land this podcast was created on.
I feel a sneeze coming, but it just doesn't want to come out. Okay.
Maybe get it out of the way first.
I'll start over. It's okay. Okay. This is going great. Welcome to the Pros and Cons podcast, brought to you by Precipice Fiction. My name is Matan, and I have once again hijacked this podcast. I'd like to introduce to you the people we have here today. We got Paddy.
Hello.
We got Phoenix.
Hello.
James.
How's it going?
And Ellie.
Hello.
So nice to see you guys. The topic of today is something I wanted to speak to you about for quite a while, and that is what happens when a book wakes up in the morning and decides it is now a movie. And that's going to be the resident filmmaker is already smiling. And
it just poops out its own option agreement.
Just lets you know, hey, so I made a decision. I think I'm going to try this movie thing. Before we do that, I'm sure the listeners would like to hear about you guys. What have you been reading? What have you been watching? What have you been up to? Paddy with a confident smile, or Phoenix?
No, it's me.
Phoenix got in first.
Yeah, heavy contrast. I've started reading Adaptations by Marcus Aurelius. But most importantly, me and my partner are watching Gilmore Girls heavily. And I just finished season 4 last night. It turns on in season 4. Like they really start, like, it's kind of just like, here's a nice environment and you're just kind of watching the Gilmore Girls exist. And it's more just like an observational show. It's just like, what's going on in their little town? And then season 4, they really start to ramp up everyone's individual plots. And it's like, wow, this is okay. Things are happening. So Gilmore Girls, I don't know if anyone's heard of this show, but people got to get on.
Haven't seen.
Missing out.
Just because I find it really interesting, could you just quickly summarize for our listeners what is Meditations by Marcus Aurelius? It's a fascinating book.
I've not read very much of it, but Marcus Aurelius is a Roman emperor from very early AD, very long ago. Like I forget his exact year. But anyway, he's a Roman emperor, and the whole thing is basically these are his journal entries where he's basically doing reflections on what he's learned, what people have taught him, his findings through the human experience, and how he's just kind of reflecting and just attempting to make himself a better person. But one of the things that makes it so beautiful is there's no indication at all that he ever intended to publish this. And they're very just intimate personal notes that he wrote to himself. And then people found, and it's been translated, and through the years, it was originally written in Greek, and then it's gone through a few iterations, obviously. But yeah, and it's very human. Here's someone that existed thousands of years ago, emperor of Rome, so very different life context, but the same principles are it's just very human. A lot of the same struggles that we think about, a lot of the lessons he pulls are just like, oh yeah, I hear you. Like on the other side of the veil, hello, I see you.
Kind of amazing that just for like something he's writing in his own time to himself, it's still eloquent and worth reading. Like my notes to myself are barely even sentences. Like I often don't know what I was talking about after the fact. And this guy is writing magnificent prose. It's timeless. Like, damn, props to him.
Highly recommended. Who's next? Who's sharing?
I mean, you called me earlier, so yeah. I'm still going through Moby Dick audiobook, but I've started another audiobook in the meantime. I am listening to The Postman by David Brin. Speaking of adaptations, this was made into a famously shite adaptation. It's a Kevin Costner film. I don't know.
I know it. Yeah, that's what I was thinking.
I've never seen it.
Is it? Was it?
What do you think of the movie?
I saw it when I was really young, and I really enjoyed it. They're running around on horses, shooting each other. So I was like, yeah, go for it.
It got like 4% on Rotten Tomatoes or something. It's
been
absolutely bad. The book's supposed to be much better. A post-apocalyptic piece of work where this guy basically finds like a postman uniform and satchel bag on like a skeleton by the roadside. But he sort of takes on himself to reinvent the American Postal Service and bring back like the sort of institutional, community-driven thing that is the Postal Service. And he's like reconnecting these isolated towns. And it's sort of an interesting meditation on like in the author's view, what it is that makes modern society like worth holding on to and good. So far, so good.
Isn't that the plot for like that new Hideo Kojima game? No, the guy
Yes.
got to do deliveries and stuff.
Yes,
I really
it
forgot
is
the name.
actually Death Stranding.
Instead of like male, it's fetuses.
Yeah,
But
I think
close.
he also,
Yeah,
I think he
Similar
also
concept,
delivers
though.
other stuff. If anyone knows anything about the connection, then let us know in the comments.
Or don't let
Whatever
us
you're
know.
gonna
We
say.
don't
Let
want
us
to know.
We care. I care.
All right. James?
I'll jump in. I'm reading Pompeii by Robert Harris, which is a semi-historical. It's probably not based on truth, but it's kind of an exploration of like what life was like 72 hours before Pompeii erupted. And it's a story that follows a few characters who, through a series of events, they all end up in the city of Pompeii, and kind of feels like a little bit of a horror because each of their reasons for going there is connected to the fact that the preemptive stuff that is going on in the volcano has caused each of them to have to go there. One of the main character is trying to figure out why the aqueduct isn't working. And the aqueduct isn't working because there's a whole load of magma kind of coming up into the sewers and stuff. So you're kind of reading it like, oh no, don't stop going closer to the volcano.
That's really
quite
cool.
good. Yeah. Robert Harris does a really good kind of exploration of, he has a great way of giving you just enough of a character to be invested and then to explore like a way of life from some time in history that he's writing about. He almost always writes about historical events. So that's really good. I'm enjoying that. And I'm also reading The Vampire Lestat, which is Anne Rice's sequel to Interview with a Vampire, which I really love because it's from like the other vampire's perspective. And he kind of wakes up and finds out that this book has been published and he's been made to seem like a real shite in it. And he's like, well, here's my version of events.
Great concept.
And he really redeemed himself in the story. Like, he's a great character. So I kind of love that shift in perspective. And she's a beautiful writer anyway. She writes really, really interesting vampire lore and kind of exploration of like, although Interview with a Vampire was kind of like the exploration of self, if self had to like go through eternity. And then The Vampire Lestat feels more like, how does society survive if society wants to keep on going forever? What ideas do we give ourselves to like build ourselves up with? So yeah, two really, truly enjoyable books there.
It's a good episode to bring up Anne Rice because she famously was very, very upset with the casting of Interview with a Vampire, and all but made petitions, kicked up the biggest stink ever in all the news until she saw the movie at premiere and she was like, oh, I guess Brad Pitt and Tom Cruise did an okay job.
Wow.
But yeah, I guess for me, quick roundup, still reading Moby Dick. They continue to be on a boat hunting a whale.
I'm glad I'm not the only one.
I think I'm going to start reading Moby Dick just as a flex to try to beat the two of you at it.
Get to the end.
At this rate, man, you probably could.
No, look, I'm enjoying it. I feel like there's nothing more we could say about it at this point, but it's ongoing.
Beating a dead whale.
I finished Obi-Wan. What to be said about Obi-Wan? It was not well written, but I guess I enjoyed it anyway. Watching The Boys, another adaptation from the comic it's based on.
Don't spoil it.
I won't
It's on
spoil
my
it,
list.
but continues to be spectacular. Our Flag Means Death I'm watching at the moment. It's fine and harmless and gets a good chuckle. And Peaky Blinders is the other one.
I just started that one.
Ooh, and Netflix did the thing where it's dropped the entire final season at once. I haven't seen spoilers, thank God, because I'm only like 3 into the final season. But just at least every episode, there's one standout scene where it's just spectacularly written, spectacularly shot and acted. And like Nathan and I, like at the end of the episode, will sit back and look at each other and just be like, shit. Like that was
You know what's not spectacular is Sam Neill's Irish accent.
Yeah, well, that's only season 1. You don't have to deal with it long.
Wait, I'm only in season 1. What happens? Oh no!
Oh no, he
wait.
comfortably
No.
retires after getting away with everything.
He just went to the farm. Okay.
Oh, well,
He's
that's
happy there.
He'll have a lot of space to run around.
It's a rare example of one of these shows where season 1 is actually its worst season, and it just gets better and better from there. I think around season 4 or 5, I can't remember which one, but the first 3 episodes were spectacularly bad. And I got really upset because I'm like, have they finally dropped the ball? They were doing this. And then there were just 3 really bad episodes in a row. And I was terrified. But then they picked up their game. So I don't know what happened. I don't know if the writer-director was having a rough time at that point in his life, but he just pooped out 3 really bad episodes around season 4 or 5, but then it gets good again. It's good again. So stick with it. You'll be rewarded.
All right. Thank you, Ali. For myself, I am reading the second book in the Wolf Hall series called Bring Up the Bodies by Hilary Mantel.
So good.
Yeah, retells the story of Henry Tudor through the eyes of his chief advisor. Really great so far. All right, guys, I'm going to do something dangerous. I'm going to give a bit of film history with Ali within the conversation. So I do really hope I do not make mistakes because she'll probably know. Okay, so just to put us in context of what we're going to do today, we are going to discuss what happens when a book becomes a movie. Now, let's be honest, if you're a writer, which if you're listening to this, there's a good chance you are, you've probably fantasized about having your book turn into a movie. Now, if you're a human, you probably know that it doesn't always work. What we're going to discuss today is what movies we think did a good job or maybe even turned a mediocre book into a great movie. And on the other hand, we're going to discuss what happens when people just kind of little bit of history, I swear, and then we move on to some really fun games. By the way, I told the group about the games, but I kind of lied to them about what I'm going to ask, which is always fun.
Matan.
A little bit of history. Apparently, the first movie ever created and was 1888 called Roundhay Garden Scene. It's basically just one, according to Wikipedia, okay, 1.66 seconds of a dude walking in a garden. Now, you can't do a lot of walking in 1.66 seconds, but that is allegedly the first motion film. Now, that's, I remind you, 1888. Now, when do you think a book was first turned into a movie? Now, 1888, they come up with this masterpiece, a guy is walking in the garden. When did they think to themselves, man, we should take a book and maybe a book about a guy walking in a garden and film it?
1930s.
1930s.
Is this
okay,
an open
it wasn't
question,
supposed
or
to
did
be
I
a
just yell
guessing
out?
game, but let's do it. Paddy
Okay.
says
Shit,
1930s.
Ali looks like one of those paintings in the Harry Potter series.
the emotional fucking roller coaster I went on during that spiel then, Matan. I just want to pull you aside and quiz you on your definition of first film.
Well, I question Wikipedia, okay? Because that's what Wikipedia says, and that's what I went for.
I can't even engage with your question without getting to the bottom of this. Yeah, no, I'm sure there were many just film experiments of running reels and capturing that. If we're talking about feature-length stories, though, a fun tidbit is Australia actually has a little bit of a claim to fame here, in that we're credited with having the world's first feature-length film at about 45 minutes, and it's a Ned Kelly story. I'm not going to be able to remember the year off the top of my head, but I mean, in terms of film world, the argument about what makes a film or not is whether or not it has any edits. Is this the process of different film reels, different snippets being cut together to tell a story, rather than just a documentary straight, they've just shot footage? Like, that's the difference there. Are you curating a story through edits? And that's arguably what makes a film, the art of editing. Anyway, we could spend forever on this.
We might.
But that fun tidbit, a shout out to Australia, is the Ned Kelly.
I'm going to tread carefully from here on out, but supposedly, and instead of naming one, I'm just going to give you a bunch. Some of the first books adapted into movies include Cinderella, Robinson Crusoe, and something called Trilby and Little Billy, probably Trilby and Little Billy, from 1896. Now, it was adapted, but only one scene, 45 seconds. And they're already experimenting. I guess that's not a feature film, but it happened in 1896. They just filmed this one scene out of the book. But I think we can see that it was a very early thing. From the moment films were around, people were like, hey, let's take these novels and turn them into something. And with the history part out of the way, the first game of the day. Now, I told you guys I'm going to ask you for the best movies without any context that are based on books, but I lied. We're going to play something else. I want you each to tell me one really good movie that is based on a book and one really bad movie that is based on a book, but don't tell me which is which.
It should be easy enough.
Well, let's see.
Are they allowed to be TV or do they have to be movie?
Sure, go ahead. TV.
Okay.
But don't say which is the bad and which is the good, all right?
I'm going to start, if you guys don't mind. Depends on definition of good, but I'd like to try and touch on that a little later because I got some thoughts. I'm going to say Blade Runner and iRobot.
Ooh. Okay.
I'm assuming we've all seen
wonder.
Blade Runner. Don't know if we've all seen the Will Smith extravaganza iRobot.
Okay, now you tell me which one is the bad one.
And I've read both.
Well, do you guys want to try and guess first? I don't know.
Are you trying to guess which? Am I trying to guess which is the bad one?
Either. There's definitely a wrong answer. No, there's not. It's just like
I personally didn't like. I loved the book that Blade Runner is based off, and I did not like the film at all.
Ooh.
But it might be a controversial answer there.
That's a very controversial answer.
Figured.
Well, look, the guy redid the film, not redid, but he had 4 versions of the film come out. So obviously Ridley Scott wasn't all too sure about it either, right?
I think reading a little bit about it on Wikipedia a little before, it's something that went through a lot of different iterations and it changed very, very heavily. Like the reason why the name Blade Runner has nothing to do with the film, there's very little running and no blades, is because it was a very different movie than the original Inception. I'm just going to say it. I thought Blade Runner was an amazing film, James.
You're entitled to your opinion, Paddy. Step on your toes.
Thank you. Even though it has very, very little to do with the original work, Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep by Philip K. Dick. And I think even though that's a good film, I don't know if it's a good adaptation because it's not really the same work. And I thought iRobot was really pretty mediocre, considering what a giant of science fiction iRobot the book was, and what a dense, interesting, intelligent piece of thought-provoking work. I wish they didn't call
I like how he's
iRobot.
sticking to the game. He's sticking to the game.
Isn't iRobot somewhat based off not the book iRobot, but on later works that he did based off the same concepts from iRobot? Because I think he did have books about a detective with a robot companion going around doing. I didn't actually read that one, but I think that was more where they got the idea for the film from.
I actually didn't know that. Okay. Well, maybe I should partially retract what I was saying.
I don't know that they were any good.
Matan, if I bungled the game.
No. You have taken the game to new stratospheres. That's exactly what I wanted. Who's got the next two?
I can take the piss and say one example is Game of Thrones seasons 1 to 4. And my other example is Game of Thrones seasons 5 to 8.
That's so wonderful.
Wait.
They weren't based on books.
You tell me you didn't like. Okay.
Yeah, true.
We could spend this whole podcast discussing Game of Thrones as an adaptation.
I could write a
spend one.
thesis on what went wrong with that show. I am so invested in just unpacking what happened to those scripts. I have a lot to say there. I don't know if it's worth diving into though.
For our listeners that have not watched television in the last few years, Game of Thrones did not end well. Okay.
Yeah, well, the quick summary is seasons 1 to 4 is some of the best television that's happened in decades, while seasons 5 to 8 is some of the worst television that's happened in decades. And I guess a quick guess at why I think that is the adapters had budgetary restraints in seasons 1 to 4, and they had to come up with quite some clever creative solutions for how to tell and communicate the story. By seasons 5 to 8, they were spoiled with budget, and therefore things like stakes and lore were replaced with spectacle and just high budget things. And also the idea that seasons 1 to 4 is true to the books in that they're meant to be a subversion of expectation and an undoing of fantasy tropes. While when given the reins to write their own scripts, because they got ahead of the material in seasons 5 to 8, they suddenly embraced the usual fantasy tropes, kind of forgetting that what makes Game of Thrones special is this subversion. So it's just this fascinating reversal of what it's fundamentally meant to be. And that is a topsy-turvy ride as a viewer. Just fascinating.
True.
I really like the point you made about the budget, how sometimes when you don't have a crazy $30 million an episode, or was it probably closer to $100 million an episode,
Really?
you just have to use your brain to make things work. But we'll definitely get to that. Whether to make a good adaptation is to closely adapt the material, or like Paddy mentioned earlier, sometimes the adaptation actually transcends the material by going in a different route. Yeah, fascinating.
Yeah.
I would nominate 2 books by Chuck Palahniuk, which were turned into films, Fight Club and Choke. Everyone tries to guess which was a good.
I didn't know Choke had an adaptation. That's interesting.
Yeah,
it's a series of short stories, right?
No, Choke, I think, is just the one story following one guy who makes a living by essentially pretending to choke in restaurants until someone saves him, and then kind of endearing himself to this person and letting them know that he's fallen on hard times, and they sort of send him money. That's essentially his vibe, and he's a sex addict as well, and that ties into it somehow.
Matan, how does this work? Do we guess what the good and the bad one is?
Well, yeah, go ahead. I'd like to hear some guesses, but unfortunately, I've only watched Fight Club and I haven't read either of the books.
Same.
Okay. I fold.
I thought Fight Club was pretty cool.
I like Fight Club.
Yeah, I liked it.
Yeah, my reading of it was that I really, really liked Fight Club, and I didn't really like Choke. And then when I went and read both of the books, I felt like what had happened was that David Fincher, who had directed Fight Club, had like really, really understood the tone and what made it work. And it's got a lot of like really, really dark comedy in it, and it's quite a twisted film. And I think the guys who did Choke almost tried to lean away from that vibe and try to make it a bit more lighthearted. So even though they had this very dark material, they were almost trying to lighten it up a bit. I think it made for a bit of a weird vibe. They tried to go a little bit more slapstick with it almost, to try to not lean into some of those really weird situations that the characters in Chuck Palahniuk stories tend to find themselves, which I think is an example of one thing that makes a good adaptation is when the person who's adapting it really understands what makes it work and is trying to put that forwards in through the medium of film.
Amen.
We're all just nodding.
So,
you're dropping some truth.
I don't know if like while people have been talking, they've been noticing me just like looking off. Like I've been deep in thought, like, oh God, I don't know what I'm going to say, but like, all right. So my 2 are The Tales of Narnia, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, and Ready Player One.
Come on. I mean, okay, guys.
That's the thing.
Seriously.
Okay.
Have you watched Ready Player One? Have you watched
This is the thing. It's like I can think of 2 examples, but I can't think of 2 examples that make this game hard.
I don't want to dump on a book. I don't think we should be dumping on books. But in the case of Ready Player One, I'm not sure the problem was that the adaptation was done poorly. And I'll leave it at that. Okay, that's all I'll say on the matter.
It's honestly, I feel like it's a hard one to do well, because it's like it kind of gets off on a lot of like just 80s pop culture references. And that's a hard thing to kind of recreate in a movie, I feel. Well, I take that back. They did it badly. Someone could have done it well, I'm sure. But you just have to take it a different way. I don't have that solution. I'm not claiming I could do better, but it was fun. It's fun to look at that movie. But it didn't. Fun. Yeah, it was fun.
Okay. You kind of took the one that I wanted to say, but I'll say it anyway. I hope it's not cheating. I wanted to say The Chronicles of Narnia. Okay, I think there were 3 books, right? 3 movies that turned 7 books.
I think
3
so.
movies.
I think so.
7 books, 3 movies. And my other one, on the other side of the ring, I'm putting the one, the only Harry Potter. Which one is good? Which one is bad?
I will defend.
Wait, which Harry Potter? The whole series?
As a whole,
series versus series. Yeah.
Series versus series. Okay, go ahead.
I will pick Harry Potter as the successful adaptation. Like that was just a feat in adaptation. Like nothing of that scale had really been attempted before. Harry Potter was the first thing to do it. Harry Potter walked so the Marvel Cinematic Universe could run, and they did it. They're okay. Like the third movie spectacular. All the other movies are serviceable. I'm assuming we're not talking about the Fantastic Beasts movies, just the original 7.5 movies. But they've shaped a generation and they're serviceable, good movies.
Anybody else got a couple cents on the matter?
No, I think that was a pretty good answer. I don't know how to top
that. Was a good answer. With the Chronicles of Narnia, I remember I loved The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, and that's why I specified that one. I thought that one was good. Beyond that, it felt like, granted, I didn't read all of the next, like I started reading the 3rd book and the 4th and the 3rd book, but I didn't finish it. But as it continued, it just kind of felt like what I felt like Game of Thrones did, where it's kind of like you figure, and what a lot of shows and movies, whatever, anything that continues kind of falls into the creators of shows and things kind of have a honeypot. They have an audience that they've hooked. And so the honeypot is, I want to give the audience more of what they liked from the thing that I've already put out. And so they just kind of caricaturize by expanding on these features, but it's done very mechanically and not from the heart of the story. And what you get are characters that are caricatures of the characters that they started out as. A good example of that is 30 Rock. If you watch like the first episode to the last episode, you're like, these are cartoon characters. Like, who are these people? And if you watch the first one, it's like an echo chamber, like they just get louder. But anyway, I felt like that happened a little bit in Chronicles of Narnia, where the preceding movies just felt like, all right, we're going to kind of lean into the action. We're going to do these sorts of sequences and stuff. And it's like, I don't know.
There's a term for that, which I actually learned on the wonderful website TV Tropes a little while ago. You guys ever heard of Flanderization? Flandersization?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, I have not.
It's the way Ned Flanders and a lot of characters in The Simpsons start out as like these interesting kind of rich characters, and they just become absolute stereotypes themselves.
Their own catchphrases. They start to revolve around their own catchphrases.
Mhm.
Yeah.
I will say that the good one for me was Harry Potter, and the one that failed was Chronicles of Narnia. I'll just say that as a kid, I loved the Chronicles of Narnia. I was freaking obsessed with that lion. I just wanted more and more and more. And I really enjoyed the first movie. The first movie was as good as an adaptation as I could have asked for. I didn't miss anything. I liked the way it looked. I liked the way it sounded. But similar to what Ali said, just the scope of this. You got 7 books. Let's say you even go for 3. The actors get older. The directors change. And this all happens in Harry Potter as well. The actors get older. The directors change. And yet in Harry Potter, they managed to hold it together. They managed to have this coherent story, and they managed to put out movies, in reasonable time. So Harry doesn't have a beard by the time he's 14. Whereas in the Chronicles of Narnia, the first one was great, and something happened in the second one. They just decided to adapt Prince Caspian, and the rest is history. Well, thank you guys for sharing. I wanted us to discuss what makes a book suitable or unsuitable to be adapted and why. And you guys all kind of touched on it, but I'd like to hear a bit more from you guys. Now, feel free to mention as many good examples and bad examples as you go, but just why do you think certain book, is it just the producer, not doing a good job? Is it the director doing a butchering of the source material? Or is sometimes some books are just like more cinematic, if you know what I mean? I see Alice.
I could jump in. So a word I often use, I'm going to use it a lot right now, so I'll introduce it. Like transliteration is the word I use rather than adaptation when I'm thinking about it. I don't know, it feels like a word that sits a bit neater in terms of how I think about the process of how a story goes from one medium to another. And I guess it's fundamentally understanding that 2 different mediums are relying on different craft tools with which to tell the story. There's just going to be a different emphasis on how this story can be communicated. So the structure has to change from a book to a movie, and it's embracing that change rather than seeing it as something as fundamentally negative. And it's the tools with which you communicate meaning. So one of my biggest learning curves going from writing screenplays to writing books was this idea that I have access to interiority as a new tool with which to tell the story, because that's something films just don't have. Films will communicate interiority through landscape, through music, through reaction shots. It took me a really long time to kind of understand that reaction shots aren't a thing in novels. I'd write in suddenly a character's expression after someone's like said something, and you're like, in theory, that sounds like it works, but maybe I was doing it too often because an editor came in being like, why are you like showing me what all the other people are doing? And I'm like, they're reaction shots. Until I kind of realized that's not what books do. It's just a different language. And I had a good think about this question, Matan. And I think the only way I can, because I don't believe any story can't be adapted. I think that's probably a silly stance. I think it's just any story can be taken. All right, let's try and mush it into this new framework, and some will be more successful than others. But that's when you have the freedom to do something different, and you're probably encouraged to do something different. But I guess for me, say if I've had a story idea and I'm like, am I going to write this as a book, or am I going to write it as a screenplay? And I guess some of the questions I would ask myself is, how much plot does it have? And the reason I say that is because I actually feel like screenplays need more plot than books. If I overplot a book, that's a really good way to do myself in. It's almost as if books want slightly less plot beats but want to spend more time with them, while a screenplay needs to churn through plot beats a lot faster. So I'd ask myself how much plot it has, and I would probably put more plot on the screenplay. I would ask myself how much lore does it have? And lore can mean anything from world building to just fundamental backstory. Because I think something really juicy a book can do is it can introduce backstory at any time. It can be a part of a character's thoughts. It can be ever present, the things that happened before that influence the events of the now, where a screenplay doesn't quite have that freedom to spend that time exploring backstory and lore to that degree. It just kind of needs to go once it goes. And the third question I thought of I would ask myself is how important POV is, because a screenplay is fundamentally an objective POV. It's going to be distant, and we're going to be observing these characters making actions and decisions. While a book, if this is a story that I believe is only going to work because the voice is fantastic, the voice is the story, then I probably have a book on my hands and will be more successful as a book. So I'll leave it there, because those are kind of the three questions I thought about what could make one more successful in one medium than another.
Mm-hmm. Obviously, I haven't been as deeply into filmmaking as you have. I majored in it in high school, but I do see what you're saying about plot versus letting the moment sit, enjoying the moment, interiority, reaction shots, and it just makes me think two things. First of all, I wonder what happens, Ali, if you personally decided to write and sound as a book right now. Like, you've done the movie, you're just like, okay, let's make a companion book. How would that look like? Would you dare change things? And
did you want me to actually answer that?
I would, and
yeah, I would.
Go ahead. Yeah,
I would find that so hard. I don't think it would work as a book, and I think the answer is POV. For me, I think a lot of what makes Unsound successful is the distant lens, kind of watching these characters and an audience being able to kind of project onto them, wonder what they're thinking or feeling in a moment and how they're going to react to something. I think so much of what holds Unsound together is because of that distant lens. If I was to write that from one or both POVs, like, it could be a fun, serviceable YA book, but it's just not what I got out of Unsound was that distant lens. So I would really struggle to access it as a book, I think.
I jump in there and agree with that, because that's kind of my own thinking about adapting a book. One of my film that I really like is A Talented Mr. Ripley with Matt Damon, if anyone's seen that. Matt Damon sort of impersonates someone else, I guess, and pretends to be someone else in order to kind of travel around Italy with Jude Law and Gwyneth Paltrow.
He's a con artist, right?
Well, it's kind of unclear what his motivations were and what he was doing, but he sort of ends up, Jude Law ends up dying and he ends up adopting Jude's Law identity, and kind of one thing leads to the next. And you kind of spend the whole film being like, is this guy kind of a little bit hapless and sort of just reacting in the moment, or is he a sociopath who like set out with the intention of doing this? When I found out that this was a book, I was like, amazing, because it's such an interesting watch. Like, you'll watch it and interpret it one way, and then you'll watch it and almost interpret it the other way. But in the book, you have his POV the whole way through. Completely different experience. Yeah. And I don't think that would have been an interesting film at all. Whereas when you watch, they decided to change it, strip out his POV, where you just have scenes of him, just a close-up, and obviously the audience experiences, what are you thinking? What are you doing? What's going on?
Yeah. No, one of my go-to examples is Die Hard. for why this works so well as a screenplay is because you're just meant to be on the wonderful ride of watching him preparing something else. He's going somewhere else and he's doing something, and there's so much joy in being like, what's the motherfucker doing now? And to get that's what I love when screenplays can do that well. And I learned very quickly that books really struggle to do this. It's not a strength of a book.
That is because you're wondering what he's putting into action. Yeah.
Yes.
That's interesting. Yeah.
Yeah.
There's something similar with Rambo, the film. I feel like when Rambo turns around and becomes active in the story rather than being reactive, it's almost like a surprise.
Yes. Yeah.
Whereas the experience in the book is that you kind of know he can do this and you're sort of waiting for him. You're kind of waiting for the catharsis of him to start hitting back, basically.
You just stole one of my questions. Like, I was totally going to ask if Rambo is based on a movie.
Sorry. There you go. I have a really big interest in like books that were turned into films, so I tend to like track them down and read them just to see what the differences were. So I might absolutely slaughter everyone at that game.
Well, I'll take it into account when I divide you into teams. Thank you. Paddy, Phoenix, I'd love to hear your thoughts about this topic.
Well, this is like, a lot of what Ali said, like, I agree with 100%, especially the what was it, transliteration is what you said. That's one of the things that I admire about like the Lord of the Rings books so well, is because you can see that it's like, all right, they didn't just like, all right, there's this scene, there's this scene, there's this scene. Now we need to make those with a camera. It's like you read the books, you understand the story and what's trying to be communicated. And then, all right, we're going to communicate it with different tools and in a different way. So that's a big one for me. And then one thing that just came up around like point of view that I think is so cool is between Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets, the movie and the book. Because in the book, you have interiority. In the movie, you have this distance. So two scenes that I thought were really cool is when they're in the dueling club and Harry Potter summons the snake. In the book, you're inside of his head. You just hear him speaking English and he's like, why are people's reactions so weird? What's going on? And then you only find out after the fact what happened. Whereas in the movie, you're in the audience, you're hearing him speaking partial tongue. And it's like, you need to do that scene differently, and both work, but it just needs to be communicated completely differently. I just thought it was cool.
No, it's a good example.
Matan, what was the question again?
The question was, what do you think makes a book suitable or unsuitable for adaptation?
Suitable and unsuitable is an interesting question. Do you guys know I'm reading Moby Dick? You know that? Yeah,
I just want to say real quick, 5,000 years from now, when archaeologists are going to try to map out what happened to history, they're going to use you reading Moby Dick as the way to know the chronology of the world. Like, okay.
So, Ali, you know as well that Moby Dick has a lot of exposition. Like, the soul of that book is the exposition. It's the narrator talking directly at you about his takes on things. Plot's part of it, but it's so little of the book. You know, on paper, like a Moby Dick movie, although there is a movie apparently from like 1956 or something, and it's supposed to be quite good. If you were going to make a movie of it, you'd be cutting like 70% of the material. Like the men on the boat hunting the white whale is like a fraction of what that book is. So I'm going to say there's always exceptions to the rule, but maybe part of what makes a book adaptable is the narrative is actually happening in the real world of the book. It's not happening with the narrator telling you it's events and scenes and characters doing things in the real world. It's not diatribes and explanations and waxing philosophic. Have you guys ever read any Matthew Riley, the Australian author Matthew Riley? Yeah, he writes his shit like it's an action movie. Like, I'd be surprised if that guy didn't have an action movie script in his head. It's just like one big scene to the next, and there's no subtlety or much interiority or exposition. It's just big scenes, and that's like perfect movie fodder.
Yeah, I'm glad to hear this, because it really feels like you guys are onto something. Because when you think about it, that's what books have on movies. You get to see what's inside the character, and sometimes a lot of the conflict is inside the character. Whereas in movies, if the conflict is not out there, it's sometimes really hard to convey that unless you just do a lot of monologue. Some movies have done for more success or less success. I think Fight Club has the main character talking in his head the whole movie.
Yeah, it does.
All right. Thank you, guys. With that out of the way, I would like to divide you into two teams. All right.
Oh, you weren't joking.
No, and since James has announced himself as a film master, I will not let James and Ali be on the same team. Therefore, you will each take a P, Paddy and Phoenix. James, on my
Team P.
screen, you are closer to Paddy, so you will be with Paddy. Phoenix, on my screen, you are closer to Ali, so you will be with Ali. Now,
Not Team P.
No, we're not Team P.
we do not have a buzzer, so you'll just have to talk.
But-
Actually, you know what?
Gonna yell at each
We
other.
have the,
How are we gonna just gotta yell? I mean,
that's
let me
fine.
explain the game. Here's the game. I'm gonna say the name of the movie, and you gotta say book or not. And is it
Book
based on a book?
Or
Now,
not.
book or not? Not book, book. Book, no book. Okay. Just Ali's trying to think. What can I scream faster?
What about yes or no? I feel like that's...
But here are the rules. If there is a book that has been written after the movie, it doesn't count. Okay, and that is surprisingly the case quite a few times.
Mhm.
Okay, let's start with a quick test. All right, let's see if you guys have been paying attention. You know the rules, book or not. All right, book or not, The Hobbit.
book.
Book.
James, 1 point for Team Paddy and James.
Yes.
As you know, if you've been listening to previous games, I do not write the points. And we'll
Do we
figure
get
it out
extra
later.
points for saying it's a shit adaptation?
In my book,
Well.
yes. You get points.
All right, let's keep going. Book or not, Robin Hood.
Oh,
Oh.
That was
Oh.
a tentative.
Aw.
do I lose a point if we're wrong?
I would say
No, definitely a book, guys.
Gotta be.
There
a
have
book,
been
yeah.
books.
What a
Before
fairy
the-
tales. Who holds the
Is it directly-
copyright?
Is it directly
Yeah.
based on the book? It's like pseudo
Yeah.
history, like
Tough one.
Hmm.
Okay.
it's going to be more
think
complex than I
book or-
thought.
contentious.
Okay. Book or no book, Mean Girls.
No book.
No book.
No book.
Shit, I think that's a book.
No book.
book.
No.
book.
Tina Fey.
No book.
Yes.
Yay. Book or no book, Inception.
No book.
No book. Oh wait. Well,
No.
very much adapted from William Gibson's Neuromancer. I would actually say that
Is
was a
it?
rip-off.
You
Yeah.
think?
Oh yeah.
Well,
for sure.
It could be considered a ripoff, but technically it's no
I
book.
don't actually see
So
many
point goes
parallels
to-
between the two myself, but we can continue this discussion.
Well, I mean, the main character, his job is like an international criminal who travels around the world, infiltrating people's like
Well,
virtual
their
realities.
inner networks.
And he is pursued
But
by
we-
his dead ex.
but there's
And yeah, it's like super
There-
similar.
Ah.
Okay.
And they even have like
Oh, wait.
the zero gravity and like the avalanche and
But
stuff,
in
which
award
are scenes that
season,
don't make sense in Inception. But then when you read Neuromancer, you're just like, oh,
But
you
that's
took the
just
set
what-
piece.
but you're describing literary theft, not adaptation.
Fair
That's
enough.
different.
Fair enough.
Okay. That's book or no book. We're continuing with Mr. Nolan. Shutter Island.
book.
Book.
Definitely book.
Book. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Book or no book. Django Unchained.
No book.
Oh.
No book. I
Oh, where? Oh.
feel like Quentin doesn't really do books.
Well, it's based on a previous movie, but I think that one was an original screenplay.
I thought
And the
Quentin
correct answer
Tarantino just made
is-
stuff up as he went along.
The correct answer is no book.
Yeah,
Completely
yeah.
original.
Well, the first movie,
Yeah, well.
What was
sure.
the first movie?
Django Unchained.
What was the
Oh, okay.
All right. Book or no book? The Godfather.
Book.
I saw James's light flash, so that's Team Paddy and James. Book or no book? Star Wars.
No book.
No book.
No book. Definitely no book. Book or no book? Raiders of the Lost Ark.
No,
No book.
No book.
Indiana
book.
Jones.
But
Who
I
said no
mean,
book?
he's also accused of literary theft, but no book.
Okay. No book. Point to Team Paddy. Okay. I don't know if you guys know that movie. I'm gonna hope that yes. No Country for Old Men.
Book.
No.
Book or no book?
Book.
Book.
Combat
Book.
Correct. Such a Paddy
So
movie. It is
Big
such.
Paddy fan.
I think
Such
James is
a
also a
Paddy
huge
movie,
fan
right?
of that one, right?
I didn't like the film.
Oh,
we
you-
chatted about this. Yeah.
Man,
Oh.
Yeah.
that's right.
What?
We've argued about this over drinks.
Yeah.
You're wrong. You're
Well,
objectively wrong.
I'd say
There's no
it
room
works
for
really
argument.
well in a book, like how that ending worked, but I don't think it worked in film. I think there's a different expectation.
All right. Book or no book? The Green Mile.
Book.
Book.
Stephen King, right?
Book.
Yep.
Book. Yeah, James, definitely. Book or no book? Good Will Hunting.
No book.
No book.
I saw Ali's light first, and
Damn
it's
straight.
not a book. It's a script, and it is an Oscar-winning script.
Correct.
Right? Book or no book? The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo.
Book.
Definitely book. I think that was again Ali. And the last one for today. Book or no book? Let's see if it's hard or easy for you guys. Rocky.
Book.
Ooh. Oh.
And that was a guess. I don't know.
I think Sylvester Stallone might have written it. Actually,
I want to say no book for that.
I'm gonna change to no book.
I think it's no
Okay,
book
think
and he
about the
wrote
plot.
script.
Think about the plot. Can you imagine it as a book, like the interior?
It'd be really
Rocky?
shit. Yeah, you're right.
Adrian.
There could be way more internal information that we're not getting access to.
Yeah.
The boxing match could be a very small part of the film.
Okay. No, I'm glad to say. First of all, I love the movie, but I'm glad to say Rocky was not based on the book.
Good. Maybe for the best.
Just the bonus round. Jurassic Park.
Book.
Book.
All right, book. All right. Yeah, I think it's a tie. I have no idea who won.
We're gonna have to listen back.
Yeah, we're gonna figure out at some point. Thank you guys for playing the game. We'll just finish with one last question for you guys, and thank you for all these amazing thoughts and ideas. I feel like I learned a lot, especially about how some books can really be adapted as is, and some need a bit more workshopping to fit as a movie. My final question to you is this: is there a fantasy, horror, or sci-fi book that you really want to see as a movie? You're also allowed to say if you think it's a good idea or you like you're a bit skittish about it, but I'd love to hear what you think. We're still a speculative fiction group. Paddy, you look ready
Can
to
I
answer.
please start? I want to
Please.
see this as a multi-million-dollar Netflix extravaganza a la Game of Thrones. The Three-Body Problem. I don't remember the author's name. He's a Chinese author.
That is coming out.
GXC.
That is
What?
coming out.
Really?
Yeah, I think there's a film coming out.
Okay. It's not out, but Paddy, why this one?
It is huge and spectacular on a scale that like you really just don't see in fiction at all. Some of the set pieces are fabulous and gigantic. Just some of the set pieces in this potential film would be absolutely incredible. Different worlds, like humanity developing over the course of hundreds and thousands of years. Yeah, if they do it and do it right, it will be phenomenal. And not enough is said about these books. They were absolutely fabulous. I think they should be a lot bigger than they are.
Yeah, I think the set pieces would be really original and really, just really, really cool.
Yeah.
Like some of the stuff that happens in it is really cool. It really stay with you. Like,
Yeah. Well, that's my 2 cents. Three-body problem.
Good choice.
I've never had this thought until just now. It just popped into my head, and I think like, all right, yeah, I could get behind this. I think it would take some doing. Like it would be hard to translate, but I think it could be done, and I think it'd be cool if it was done well. 100 Years of Solitude. There's a lot of weird, like surreal humor. Like it's a lot in terms of like scenes, but in terms of like emotion and style of humor and like material that's available, like you don't have to parse it the same way. And I feel like if you could convey that same message, I think it'd be really cool. I think it'd be pretty funny.
Could you give us a brief plot breakdown of 100 Years of Solitude?
Yeah.
I've actually never heard of it.
100 Years of Solitude is a very... Did the guy won all kinds of awards, I'm pretty sure. I'm just going to look up his name.
Garcia Marquez, a famous Colombian author.
Oh, I've heard of this.
Basically, it's a small town or small village in basically like relatively separate from the rest of the world in some country in South America. I forget which one. Basically, it just follows this family tree. Basically, you follow them over the course of 100 years in this little village as like railroads are built and like gypsies pass through and like kind of civilizations kind of developing the world around them and sort of slowly leaking into their village, and just like kind of how they zanily participate in this expansion and what fascinates them and what they take on board and what obsesses them and like things like that.
It's always turning up in like greatest novels of the 20th century lists and stuff like that.
It is exceptional. I really love your choice, Phoenix. Quick question. It is a generational book that covers a lot of people with the same name. Would you, let's say you're the director or the casting director, would you change the actors each time it's a new generation, or would you keep them the same? They're even alleged to look similar in the story.
I could see
Same
it
actors.
being used as used as a humor point, like very, very similar names, and then maybe you just change like very subtle features because
Yeah.
it's like it's so hard to follow when you're
Mustache.
reading. And I had to reference the family tree that they put at the front of the book so many times. I'm like, Marcus Aureliano, who's that? So I think that would be good to lean into that as a source of humor.
I always imagined it as a play, as a theater play, and I just imagined the same actors coming back,
Yeah.
shuffling in and out.
So can I give a shout out to Cloud Atlas as a transliteration?
Ooh,
That is so I wanted to throw a couple examples out that where I believe the transliteration is actually better than the book it's based on. And I think
Okay.
Cloud Atlas by the Wachowski sisters is fantastic because they took film techniques to improve upon, well, to just do new creative things with the source material. And one of them being we have our set cast. And then they just play like spot the actor through all these the different iterations of the story. And it is so well done. So well done.
that's a good point.
Two other ones I can think of is like Howl's Moving Castle as the Ghibli adaptation on the original, and Zack Snyder's Watchmen Come and Fight Me. I actually think the movie's better than the acclaimed graphic novel.
Controversial.
Right?
Well,
That's a whole can of worms.
Yeah. That's
I mean,
just
yeah.
I know it is. I know it's a hot take, but
It's a steaming hot take.
I understand the adaptation choices made in the story, and I actually believe the movie as a neat whole is more thematically sound and tied and woven together more tightly than the graphic novel for some of its adaptation choices. Anyway,
it was a good adaptation. It was a good adaptation.
but I'll leave
I'll
that
just
there.
say,
That'll be my airtime.
I'll just say, having watched Cloud Atlas drunk, at the time I thought it's the best movie in the history of the universe. And when I was hungover the next day, I'm like, what the hell was that? So I haven't watched it sober, so my verdict is pending.
You'll still love it.
But I will.
Yeah.
I will. All right.
Otherwise, anything.
What do you guys want to see?
Yeah, anything by Brandon Sanderson was going to be my answer. I'd love to watch them succeed or fail
Mistborn.
spectacularly. I just want to see them try.
Okay, so anything by Sanderson. What else do you guys want to see adapted?
I would love to see any of John Connolly's Charlie Parker series adapted. These are like quite dark detective novels, also with some like quite eccentric, almost rompish characters to kind of contrast against the very dour, very grave main character and his backstory. But they're always really good mysteries. They have this like very tragic tone, but also like the slightest little hint of like the supernatural going on. And structurally, his first one, Every Dead Thing, was really unusual in that the first half of it had like a 3-act structure. But then when you took a step back and looked at the overall story, it was like a really consistent 4-act structure. And I was like, what? How did you do that? Why is this here? And why is that there? Why am I invested in you investigating this mystery? But the real mystery is this other thing. And he just kind of switches gears in the middle very seamlessly. So I'd love to see that attempted as a film.
Oh, something that just occurred to me. So very soon in August, we're getting the Game of Thrones prequel, House of the Dragon, which is I'm fascinated by, because what it's based on is not really what you would call a story. It's George R.R. Martin writing down his in-world history. It's a Wikipedia, but for all the reasons it shouldn't work as a pure 700 pages of exposition, it's actually gripping. I don't know how George gets away with it, but he does. But in terms of an adaptation exercise, I am fascinated by what they could have possibly done to turn this into a TV show.
Is this a reaction pod suggestion?
Yeah, I'd probably have a lot to say.
All right.
So the book already
Phoenix.
exists and they're turning it into a show.
Correct.
Yeah.
Okay.
But you can barely call it a book, as Matan said.
Yeah.
But it's like someone said they're adapting the Wikipedia page on the history of Mongolia into a movie.
Yeah.
Which incidentally also would make an amazing film, even though it's already.
For me personally, I was going to say Mistborn, the Mistborn series by Brandon Sanderson, because it's so full of action. Just the way it's so good. I can just see it, but I can also see it being completely and utterly butchered and destroyed.
Excited either way.
With that being said, I would really love to see the book by Philip K. Dick, Ubik, turned into an Inception-style movie. Now, Ubik is this movie that basically starts with a guy talking to his dead wife. Yeah, it's a book starting with a guy talking to his dead wife over the phone in this kind of cemetery where she's kept half alive. There's a lot going on there psychologically. It has this Inception-like ending where you're just not sure what the hell you just read. And I'd love to see someone take on it and adapt it because it is a bit of an old book, kind of change what needs to be changed to make it modern.
They'd have to really lean into the strange though. Like you could not pull away from the strangeness of that book or it wouldn't work. It would have to be like absolutely batshit crazy or nothing.
Cloud Atlas, right? Okay. We do have a quote today. It is a quote by a man whose books have been adapted many, many, many times. You probably know who
I wonder who it is.
It is Stephen King.
No.
And he says this. He says, it's not a very philosophical quote, okay? Books and movies are like apples and oranges. They both are fruit, but taste completely different. Yeah, that's it. Enjoy both of them, guys. All right.
Solid observation, Stephen King.
Wise.
Yeah, you know what? You know what?
Where's Alex when you need him?
They do taste different, but they are both.
Guys, it's been a pleasure. Thank you. And have a beautiful week.
Bye-bye.
You're listening to Pros and Cons, the Precipice Fiction podcast.